My name is Alex Carter, and I've always known what it meant to work for every inch of progress in my life. At 26, I've poured my sweat, my sleepless nights, and my borderline obsessive drive into building a career as a software engineer at a fast-growing fintech startup in Manhattan. My parents see me as that kid with the shiny resume, but they don't see the countless evenings I spent hunched over a laptop, debugging code while the rest of the world slept. So when Thanksgiving rolled around this year at Grandma and Grandpa Carter's brownstone in Brooklyn, an annual ritual since I moved back from college, the last thing I expected was the trap my own blood would set for me. I stepped into the foyer, suitcase in hand, and paused at the sight of the front hall tree, stacked high with discarded winter coats. Scarves hung like trophies from distant family members. A muted jazz rendition of Over the River and Through the Woods hummed through hidden speakers, and the air was thick with the smell of roasting turkey mingled with spiced cider. My heart, already racing with anticipation of seeing Grandpa Robert, the former federal judge, with a thunderous laugh, skipped a beat when I felt the tension in my shoulders. I'd barely spoken to Mom and Dad in weeks. They'd kept dodging my calls, ghosting my texts, and when I peeked at their Instagram stories, I saw the brownstone I thought was mine in their handle. Carter Family Invests, captioned with, "Our cozy new rental office. Who wants a tour?" That was the first red flag. By the time I cleared my throat in the living room, I was plastering on a polite smile and calculating my approach. Grandpa's eyes glinted as he greeted me, arms wide open. "Alex, my boy, you look well. Welcome home." His voice carried both warmth and the weight of someone who had helped shape laws. He clapped me on the back so hard I nearly stumbled forward. But I steadied myself. I returned the hug, scented by his lavender cologne and the faint aroma of old books. And I forced myself not to mention the Airbnb listing yet. My sister Mia slipped me a wink from behind Grandpa's chair. She's 23, in her final year of law school, and her gaze was that of someone who'd already picked sides. I caught her off. Chai camera, black and white iPhone. The screen full of tabulated evidence photos of the listing. Email chains. A PDF of ownership documents. We had been gathering proof for weeks. In secret, me, coding through my anger into spreadsheets. Her, cross-referencing legal filings. Our parents, meanwhile, had been playing house with the property, pocketing rental income and glossing over every question with rehearsed excuses. Roof needs work. Pest control. Waiting for permits. All lies. And now, here I was, standing inches away from the very people who'd taken my future. Dinner finally began when Grandma Carter, in her floral silk blouse, cleared her throat and raised a crystal glass. "To family," she said, her voice quavering not from age but from decades of holding emotions in check. We all echoed "to family." The clink of glasses reverberating through the high-ceilinged room. I looked around the table, aunts and uncles in mahogany-colored blazers, cousins in festive sweaters, everyone shining in the warm glow of candlelight. But there was an undercurrent, a brittle hush, like a frozen lake waiting to crack. As the first platters of herb-basted turkey slid in front of us, Grandpa cleared his throat again. Priestly. He raised his fork. "And that was my moment," he said, loud enough for every soul in the room to hear. "So, Alex, how's life in the house I bought you?" The words landed like a judge's gavel. Time slowed. Forks hovered mid-air. A gust of memory swept through me the day 6 months ago when Grandpa slipped me a simple envelope. Inside, a brass key and a handwritten note. "Your future starts here." He had worked with his lawyer, signed off on all deeds. He beamed as I held that key. Dreams blossoming in my chest. But I never got to use it. Not once. My throat tightened, and the tears I fought to swallow smothered any chance of immediate response. The house in our family's luxury LLC had its locks changed within 24 hours. My key was useless. I froze, cheeks burning, as the weight of his question pressed down on me like concrete. Across the table, Dad John Carter stared at the polished mahogany surface. Silent. He's a corporate lawyer who can argue circles around anyone. But now he seemed as paralyzed as a deer in headlights. Mom Mary Carter offered a tight-lipped smile. Too casual. Oh, Dad, she said. Voice syrupy. You must have mixed things up. We're just managing it for you until you're ready. It's an office now. You know, co-working space. So hip these days. She scooped mashed potatoes onto her plate like she was feeding a stranger. Somewhere in my mind, a tiny voice screamed, "That's my home." But outwardly, I kept calm. I lifted the fork, stabbed a slice of turkey, and coldly chewed. Inside, I was a hurricane of betrayal. I thought back to the morning I discovered the listing, the cherrywood conference table, the pastel curtains, even a tiny Buddha statue by the fireplace. Mom's touch. Undoubtedly. I'd thrown my hands up in disbelief. Tried to call her. But she'd laughed down the line, "Sweetheart. You're not ready. Don't worry, you'll thank us." So there I was, forced to play along until Grandpa, once again, redirected the spotlight. He frowned, confusion knitting his eyebrows. Everyone else went back to picking at side dishes. The chatter superficially picking up, but the tension was a live wire. Humming between us. My pulse thrummed like a high-speed train as I replayed every cracked promise, every evasive text. I clenched my fists beneath the table while mouth remained polite. But I wasn't going to let this slide. Not tonight. Not in front of him. I excused myself under the pretense of grabbing my phone charger from the den. I needed air. Space to collect the avalanche of proof we'd compiled. Outside, the November wind bit through my coat, and I pressed my back against the brick wall. In the glow of the patio lantern, I scrolled through screenshots, email confirmations of rental payments to Mom's account, copies of messages where they ignored my inquiries. And worst of all, voicemail recordings, Mom's voice. Clear and patronizing, "Let us handle it. We'll set you up for success." I thought of the brass key in my jacket pocket, the weight of it in my palm, and I felt something stir deep within. It wasn't just anger, it was resolve. All those late nights at the office, plotting my career, hadn't been for naught. I took a deep breath, locked eyes with my reflection in the sliding glass door, a man who'd fought his way here, and now was ready to fight for what was rightfully his. I stepped back inside, phone in hand, and found Grandpa alone in the den, flipping through an old album of black and white photos, his days on the bench, family gatherings frozen in time. His silver hair glowed in the lamplight, and I could see the lines etched by years of wisdom and heartbreak. I tapped him on the shoulder. He looked up, surprised. "Grandpa, I think you should see something," I said quietly. His warm gaze met mine, and for a moment, the world held its breath. I opened my Photos app and slid into gallery view. He leaned forward as I tapped the first image, the Airbnb listing page. The cherrywood table. Mom's curtains. His jaw clenched. I hit play on the voice memo. My mom's voice filled the silent den, telling me I wasn't ready. Each word cut like glass. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and set the phone down. He rose, steadier than I felt, and said, "Get everyone in the living room." His voice was as calm as a judge before verdict. My heart hammered this was it. The reckoning. As we walked back, phantoms of family history flickered through my mind, childhood birthdays, Grandpa's bedtime stories, all the moments I believed in him and in them. The living room's festive lights sparkled as family members reassembled, expecting another round of cheerful banter. Instead, Grandpa stood in the center, phone in hand, I right behind him, breathing shallow. He looked at Mom and Dad with eyes that no lie could fool. Then, quietly, he said, "Alex, go ahead." Everyone turned to me, and I knew, in that charged moment, their secrets were about to shatter. I raised my phone, hit share screen on the smart television, and watched their faces go pale as the proof of their betrayal filled the room. And as the first gasp cut through the air, I realized there was no turning back, only truth. Exposure. and the reckoning of a family torn apart. That's where I left you tonight, on the brink of a storm that would change everything. But more than anything, I was ready to see justice served. With the same fervor I'd used to code late nights in Lower Manhattan. Only this time, the battleground was my own blood, and the prize was reclaiming my future. And I'd learned that sometimes, the only way to honor a gift is to fight for it with everything you've got. When we stood there in that living room, the glow of festive lights suddenly felt like spotlights in a courtroom. And the silence stretched so long I thought it might snap. My grandpa's phone was still hooked up to the television. The rental listing and our family's own emails projected big as billboards for all to see. I could practically taste the tension, a coppery tang at the back of my throat. And I realized I'd never felt anything more alive or more terrified. My heart slammed against my ribs. But my hands were steady. I'd decided long ago that fear was just the mind's way of giving you a chance to prove how badly you wanted something. And this was my moment to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Mom's eyes flickered between the screen and me. And for the first time all evening, I saw her face crack. My father's jaw hung open. The polished corporate lawyer who could argue through 5 synonym, heavy briefs without blinking was utterly speechless. My Aunt Maribel, who'd always smiled too wide and too fast like she was hoping no one noticed her anxiety, squeezed her husband's hand so hard that his knuckles turned white. Cousins murmured among themselves, confusion mingling with the shock of seeing family secrets exposed in neon. Through it all, mi grandpa stood silent, like a judge waiting for the defense to plead. In that stretch of quiet, I felt something shift deep inside me. The anger I'd been nursing for months crystallized into clarity. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about betrayal. Trust ripped away by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It was about the belief I carried that hard work. Honesty and respect meant something. And suddenly, I realized this fight was bigger than me. It was a stand for every person who'd ever been told to wait, to be patient, to trust, and then been stabbed in the back. Gripping the smooth brass key in my pocket felt like holding a badge of honor. I slid my hand inside and pulled it out, the metal cool against my palm. The word home carved into its wooden keychain catching the light. That little charm, my grandfather's gift, had been tossed aside like trash by the people I trusted most. I held it up so everyone could see. This, I said, my voice echoing in the hush, was meant to be my start. My foundation. You turned it into a business deal. You took my future and turned it into someone else's paycheck. My words felt small, but they carried every late-night coding session, every dollar I'd saved for rent. Every time I sat alone in that hypothetical house in my mind, my mom's face went pale, and I saw tears well up in her eyes. Maybe she was realizing the weight of what she'd done. Or maybe she was panicking because public opinion was literally blasting through the walls via my sister's live stream. Either way, the pedestal she'd been standing on of being the caring mother who always had my best interests at heart crumbled beneath her. It was a painful sight, the person who should have been my ally now reduced to someone scrambling to justify her greed. Just when I thought the moment couldn't get any more electric, my grandpa spoke. His voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension like an old gavel. "You've all seen the evidence," he said, each word deliberate. "Now, I'd like to hear why you thought you could hide this from your own son or from me." He gestured toward my mom and dad, his eyes piercing. The room felt small, like we'd shrunk inside the walls. My dad swallowed, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of generations of pride, and finally found his voice. It was shaky, unpolished, nothing like the commanding tone he used in a courtroom. We thought we were protecting him. The market's volatile. Prices in Brooklyn soared faster than we could manage. We wanted to ensure the asset, our family's asset, could generate income. His words hovered, flimsy as a paper shield against the gale-force truth. I stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet my grandpa's follow-up question. "Protecting me, by stealing my home, by selling my dreams for your profit," my throat tightened. But my mind buzzed with everything. I'd prepared emotional stakes, legal precedents, public opinion. I let the question hang, daring them to answer. They couldn't. My mom blinked, her mascara running. and my dad swallowed again, his Adam's apple bobbing like a trapped bird. Then came the twist I hadn't scripted but felt coming all night. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mia's phone flash. Our live stream now had thousands of viewers watching in real time. Their comments scrolling, OMG. This family drama is unreal. Number home truth forever. Justice for Alex. The power of the crowd. The democratization of truth. Washed over the room. Suddenly, the Carter family's private scandal was public property. And there was nothing my parents could do to stop it. The social contract had shifted. If you betray your own blood, the world will bear witness. My grandpa nodded, as if he'd anticipated this all along. We will rectify this, he said, and I braced for the procedural language lawyers, contracts, courts. But instead, he did something unexpected. He turned to me and gently handed me his arm. Alex, come outside with me. He blinked, my legs unsteady under the weight of the moment. But I took his arm and followed him through the French doors to the backyard patio, where the November air bit at my cheeks. Under the glow of string lights, Grandpa Robert removed his judge's pin, a symbol of his authority in the federal system, and placed it in my palm. I'm passing this to you, he said softly. Not in the legal sense, but in the moral one. You've shown more integrity tonight than I've seen in this family in years. Now it's your turn to lead. I stared down at that little pin, etched with scales of justice, and felt a swell of something fierce and proud. In that moment, I understood that this was never just about a house. It was about values, honesty over deceit, community over profit, love over obligation. With the pin in my hand and the key at my side, I had the power to rebuild not only my home but the broken trust in this family. But before I could respond, I heard a distant car horn. Our neighbors, alerted by Mia's live stream, he had gathered outside, holding signs fair share for all, justice for Alex. The scene had become more than a family dispute. It was a spotlight on issues of wealth inequality, generational power, and the sanctity of home. And as I looked back at the doorway, I saw my mom and dad framed in the kitchen light, their silhouettes wavering. In their eyes, I could see the first glimmers of remorse or maybe fear. Either way, the tide had turned. I turned back to my grandpa, who gave me a small, knowing smile. Tonight, you decide how this ends, he said. And in that breath, I realized the real climax of our story was still to come. I nodded, clutching pin and key, feeling braver than I'd ever been. The night air felt electrified, alive with possibility and peril. Every choice from here would shape not only my future but our family's legacy. And as the lights flickered overhead and the distant crowd chanted outside, I knew the next steps would demand everything. I had my courage, my voice, and my unwavering belief that a home is more than walls and doors. It's the truth we choose to stand for. The night air bit at my cheeks, and I could still feel the hum of the crowd's chants drifting in from the street beyond the garden gate. But as my grandpa and I stood under the string lights, for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had frozen out of sheer respect. He'd handed me that judge's pin scales of justice etched in silver, and I held it between thumb and forefinger like a compass pointing true north. Beside it, the brass key with its home charm lay snug in my palm. Two symbols that suddenly felt heavier than any briefcase full of money. I looked up at him, saw the pride in his old eyes, and realized that I was no longer just a son or a grandson. I was the steward of our family's honor, the next in line to weigh truth against loyalty. My chest swelled with a fierce determination I would not cede this moment, or this fight, to fear again. Grandpa cleared his throat, and I let him speak first. Alex, he said softly, voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Tonight you proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Now, the choice is yours. How will you use this power? His question echoed in my mind like a verdict yet to be pronounced. I squeezed the pin and key, feeling their cold metal against my warm skin. And I knew I'd spent my life coding solutions to hypothetical problems. Here was a real-world puzzle with higher stakes than any algorithm could calculate. My parents were out there in the kitchen, their silhouettes flickering through the glass as they muttered apologies that sounded hollow even to their own ears. The crowd outside, fueled by Mia's live stream and the social media storm, was demanding justice. And me, I had to decide whether to fight them with legal muscle, public pressure, or something deeper, an act that would resonate long after the lawsuit had been settled. I inhaled slowly. The scent of pine from a nearby planter, mixing with the faint tang of the city's late-night exhaust. "Grandpa," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "I want to do more than just get the house back. I want to transform what they did into something positive. I want to turn that space into a community hub, free coding classes for underserved kids, legal clinics for families who can't afford representation, a safe place for people who need a home in more ways than one." His face lit up, pride flaring in his eyes like a beacon. And I felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just revenge, it was redemption for me, for my family, and for anyone who'd ever been cheated out of their dreams. I could almost see the banner above the brownstone's front door, Carter Community Center building futures together. But as soon as I spoke, a prickling sensation crept up my spine. What if my parents fought back harder? They'd already shown they were willing to lie to me and lie to him. Would they sully the community effort, turning it into another profit-driven venture? I glanced at the kitchen, where Mom stood in the doorway. Mascara streaked and shoulders slumped. She looked like a portrait of regret. But was it real, or was she calculating her next move? My father hovered behind her, glancing at the garden, then at the crowd, signs poking under the gate, "Justice for Alex. Home is a right, not a privilege." The symbolism was too rich to ignore. A home is supposed to be safe, secure, loving. My parents had weaponized it for cash flow. Now, the city was watching, and I needed to be sure that my next step wasn't simply another public spectacle, but a genuine force for good. I turned back to Grandpa. "If we do this," I whispered, "we need a plan that can't be hijacked. We need to differentiate profit from purpose." His nod was immediate. "I'll fund the legal process," he said. "But you'll need allies on the ground, people with reach and integrity." I thought of Evelyn Park, our neighbor who managed local Airbnb disputes and had quietly rallied to our side. She knows the ins and outs of short-term rentals better than anyone. Then there was Marcus Reed, the city reporter whose Hatchet Job Live tweet had broken the story. He'd already offered to spearhead a feature on income inequality in Brooklyn. And, of course, Mia, my sister, my co-conspirator in truth. We had a team before we even set foot back inside. I slipped the pin into my jacket lapel and looped the key onto my keyring, feeling the click as it locked into place. It was official. This wasn't just about getting what was stolen. It was about building something that outlasted the scandal. Something that could heal wounds and transform pain into purpose. I offered Grandpa my arm. "Let's go back in," I said, "and make it clear we're not playing their game." He smiled, just a hint of that old judicial steely glance still in his eyes. And we walked inside together. The kitchen lights stung my eyes as we entered, throwing Mom and Dad's faces into sharp relief. They froze at the sight of me. That silent, what now looked plastered on their expressions. I noticed Mom's trembling hands gripping the countertop and Dad's shoulders rising and falling like he was bracing for impact. I inhaled, the smell of sage, stuffing, and gravy thick in the air, and leveled my gaze at them. "We've decided," I began, "that the house isn't going back into a rental pool. It's being repurposed as a nonprofit community center. We'll register it as a 501c3. We'll host events, workshops, free services. Everyone who was ever locked out of opportunity will be welcome." My words seemed to reverberate off the tile backsplash. Mom's lips parted, but no sound came out, and Dad's jaw clenched as if his world had just shifted under his feet. Suddenly, the back door burst open, and Marcus Reed stepped in, camera crew in tow, followed by Evelyn Park, carrying folders brimming with local permit applications and landlord-tenant dispute records. A hush fell over everyone. I felt my pulse race. This was riskier than any court filing. We were laying our cards on the table in front of the same family that betrayed me, and in front of the public eye. But this risk held the promise of a higher truth, that home can be more than four walls. It can be hope, community, and second chances. As Marcus flipped on his microphone and announced, "We're live in 3, 2, 1. I caught Mia's eye. She gave me a small nod. And I knew she was streaming too, capturing every second for thousands, watching online. The stakes had never felt higher. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and faced my parents once more. "This is our chance to rebuild trust," I said, voice calm but resonant. "Not just between us, but with everyone this community has forgotten." The words landed like pebbles thrown into water, sending ripples across the scene. My mom's uncertainty, my dad's conflicted gaze, the press's eager anticipation. Outside, the chants softened into murmurs of encouragement. And just as I was about to outline the next steps, the power in the kitchen flickered. The lights dimmed, and the overhead chandelier quivered ominously. In that heartbeat of darkness, I realized our family's fate and this community's hung in the balance of a fragile light. I felt the hum of electricity return just as the chandelier steadied, its crystals chiming softly like a call to order. The room was thick with anticipation, cameras poised, neighbors peering through the French doors. My parents frozen mid-step between apology and protest. I could sense every heartbeat in that kitchen, the collective intake of breath before a plunge. I stood tall, feeling the weight of the judge's pin over my heart and the cold brass of my keychain pressing against my thigh anchors to truth and home. In that sudden clarity, I understood the real risk I was taking, not a legal gambit, not a social media stunt, but a collision of family loyalty and public accountability. Would my parents sabotage this plan out of spite, or might they surprise me by stepping toward redemption? Mia gave me a barely perceptible nod. She was positioned by the side door, livestream camera balanced on her shoulder, ready to catch every reaction. Across the room, Evelyn and Marcus exchanged a glance, Evelyn's eyes glittering with excitement, Marcus's with the practiced intensity of a reporter who smelled a story that could redefine local power structures. I drew a breath that tasted faintly of sage and leftover gravy, and I let it out as I opened my mouth. "Thank you all for being here," I began, voice measured, but carrying the momentum of conviction. Tonight we witnessed a betrayal. A home promised became a ledger item. But simply reclaiming what was taken isn't enough. We have an opportunity to transform this wound into a bridge. My parents' faces darkened as they registered my words, no longer angry at the accusation, but wary of the path I was charting. I moved toward the center of the kitchen, stepping past the oak island that had once been the backdrop for Sunday breakfasts and holiday cookie bakes. I gestured at the pin clipped to my lapel. This stands for justice served, not vindictive litigation, but restorative action. And this, I pulled the key from my pocket and held it aloft, stands for home, which is a sanctuary, not a commodity. The cameras clicked, and I felt the current of attention swirl around me, propelling me forward. Our plan is simple. We'll draft articles of incorporation for a nonprofit Carter Community Center. We'll host free coding workshops, pro bono legal clinics, and mental health support circles. We'll partner with local schools and community groups. And yes, we'll open the doors next month. I let that land like a stone, waiting for the ripple of reactions. Then came the twist I hadn't scripted. My mother stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "Alex," she swallowed, glanced at Dad, who remained rigid. "I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you from risk, from disappointment, from instability, but I see now I was projecting my own fears. I'm with you." The hush cracked, and everyone leaned in. My heart pounded. Was this genuine contrition, or another manipulation? I searched her eyes and found something new, a glimmer of contrition that echoed my own. My father exhaled, then stepped forward too. "I apologize. Son, I can't promise I'll be perfect at this, but I want to help." His voice was raw, no rehearsed legalese. Just a man admitting failure. I felt the tension ease, replaced by a cautious hope. But the social undercurrents were far from settled. Marcus Reed, mic in hand, cleared his throat. "Alex, Do you worry that turning this into a community center might just be another form of gentrification, displacing those you aim to help? His question cut to the core. I'd anticipated legal pushback, but not an ideological challenge. I paused, aware that outside, the crowd, people of color, long-term residents, artists, families were watching, judging whether this was genuine or another wealthy family's vanity project. I gathered my thoughts, feeling the old imposter syndrome whisper in my ear, "You don't belong here." But I clenched the pin in my lapel, letting its weight steady me. "That's a valid concern," I said, voice calm. "So we're setting up a community advisory board, with elected local residents deciding programming, hours, and services. Power won't flow from the top down, it will emerge from the ground up." I saw relief and approval in Evelyn's eyes. She'd been wrestling with the very same fear. At that moment, the front door burst open again, and a group of neighborhood teens, kids I'd mentored at coding hackathons, streamed in. Clutching laptops and notebooks, they cheered, their youthful energy charging the room like electricity. They surrounded me, thrusting their hands into mine. And one of them, a 16-year-old girl named Jasmine, pressed a handwritten petition into my hand, hundreds of signatures, urging the center's creation and pledging volunteer hours. The spontaneity of their arrival conveyed something no formal agreement ever could: community buy-in. I felt my eyes prick with emotion. These were the faces I'd wanted to serve. Raw and hopeful, not polished donors or sympathetic reporters. My parents exchanged a look: bewilderment, perhaps pride, or maybe resignation that their son had outgrown the old rules. Grandma Carter, as frail as a porcelain figurine but as sharp as ever, appeared at the kitchen archway, leaning on her cane. She cleared her throat once and smiled through her tears. "I think Robert and I started a revolution tonight," she said softly, voice cracking but jubilant. Her presence, the matriarchal blessing, washed over me like warm sunlight. I walked over and knelt beside her. "We're just getting started, Grandma," I whispered. She patted my hand and winked, as if to say, "I know." But even as hope swelled in that kitchen, I felt a tremor of foreboding. Outside, the live stream comments had exploded with support and with criticism. Someone accused me of capitalizing on my grandparents' retirement fund. Another questioned whether my parents would quietly sell the property behind my back. The ideological factions of social media were already aligning. Some hailed me as a hero. Others labeled me naive or opportunistic. I exhaled a shaky breath and realized that turning this family saga into a public crusade had opened me to a new battlefield: the battle for narrative, for authenticity, for lasting impact. I looked at the faces around me: family, friends, neighbors, press, and I understood that the test of our community center wouldn't be how grand it looked at opening, but whether it could weather the storms of public opinion, bureaucratic red tape, and the lingering wounds of betrayal. My grandma's cane tapped once against the tile. The hush returned, pregnant with possibility and fear, and before anyone could speak again, the lights flickered and then went out entirely. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the glow of smartphone screens. In that blackout, I felt every heartbeat sync with mine. The collective breath of a room suspended between promise and uncertainty. And in that instant, I realized that our real journey was just beginning, and the next chapter would demand more courage, more trust, and perhaps a sacrifice no one saw coming. I woke to the dull ache of my own heartbeat in the pre-dawn hush. The house around me still cloaked in darkness after the blackout had left us stranded the night before. The faint glow of a single street lamp seeped through the kitchen window, casting elongated shadows of overturned chairs and scattered documents, the tangible aftermath of our community's declaration of intent. I rubbed my eyes, palms still tinged with the cool metal of the judge's pin, and realized that last night's storm, both literal and figurative, was only the prelude to the real challenge. Today we had to turn promise into progress, and I was both terrified and exhilarated by the task. I slipped into the living room where Grandpa sat sipping coffee, steam curling like a question mark from his mug. The lamplight traced the lines on his face, silent testimony to decades of battles won and lost in court. Morning. Your Honor, I said quietly. He gave me a half smile. Up early. Alex, the world waits for no one. His words felt like a gentle reminder that intentions without action are just dreams. I sat beside him. Key and pin lying on the coffee table like a fragile truce. We've got permits to file, boards to convene, outreach to schedule. I said, voice low, and I still don't know if Mom and Dad are fully on board. He nodded, eyes thoughtful. Redemption is a journey, not a moment. Give them room, but hold the line. I stood and stretched. Muscles knotted with anticipation. I headed downstairs to the half-renovated basement-turned-office, where Mia was already at her laptop, drafting bylaws under the glow of a desk lamp. Evelyn's pile of zoning applications sat next to her, and Jasmine and the other teens dozed on beanbags, exhausted but smiling from yesterday's breakthrough. I admired Mia's focus. She'd inherited Grandpa's analytical mind, and I felt a surge of pride. This was family in its truest form, united by purpose rather than blood alone. We spent hours drafting the nonprofit's charter. Every sentence carried weight. No person shall be denied services based on income, race, or immigration status. We debated the wording until our eyes blurred. Around noon, Dad showed up, wearing a tie that looked like it was dying for a break. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking, I'll handle the liability aspects. I can draft insurance waivers and corporate filings. His offer was practical, but I sensed hesitation. This was outside his comfort zone of high-stakes corporate litigation. Thanks, Dad, I said, but we need your genuine voice on our advisory board. Not just legal copy. His face tightened. Would he retreat or step into unfamiliar territory? He nodded. Slowly. I'm in. That afternoon, we opened the front door to neighbors who'd signed up to volunteer retired teachers, local artists, parents of special needs children. Each held a signature sheet or a warm handshake. But most importantly, they brought their stories. Mrs. Delacruz spoke of her son's need for coding mentorship. Mr. Leif O'Reilly offered to teach resume workshops. A Haitian-born nurse volunteered free health screening clinics. The basement echoed with newfound energy. I realized that home was no longer a symbol engraved on a keychain. It was a tapestry, woven from countless hopes and struggles. Just as the momentum peaked, a new twist threatened to unravel us. Marcus Reed burst in, phone in hand, eyes alight with urgency. You need to see this, he said. On the screen was an online petition from a local landlord association, accusing our center of unfair competition and threatening to sue us for encroaching on for-profit business. They'd spun our goodwill into a liability, using fear of lost profits and gentrification to rally against us. The basement fell silent. The teens exchanged worried glances. Mia's fingers stilled above the keyboard. Even Evelyn looked pale. This was a social fault line. I'd underestimated the clash between altruism and entrenched self-interest. My heart pounded as I processed the news. If we rolled over, our center would die before it started. If we fought back, we risked dragging our mission through lawsuits and media mudslinging. I gripped the judge's pin in my palm, its cool weight grounding me. Then I thought of the kids waiting for mentorship, the families clinging to hope, the symbol of home that had been reclaimed not just for me but for an entire community. I drew in a breath that tasted of resolve. We wouldn't be intimidated by profiteers. We'd transform this attack into a testament of our commitment. I stood and raised my voice so every volunteer could hear. They can threaten us all they want, but they can't stop us from serving our neighbors. My words rippled through the room, reigniting determination. Mia reopened her laptop and began drafting a community pledge. Evelyn rallied local small businesses to sign statements of support. Marcus recorded interviews with residents ready to attest to our positive impact. My father cleared his throat. I'm contacting our attorney pro bono network if they sue. We counter-sue for protected nonprofit activity. His tone carried newfound fierceness. The basement buzzed again, this time with defiance. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the renewal-lit office, I paused to look at the key and pin on the table. They were no longer mere symbols, they were promises I intended to keep. But beyond the basement door, the landlord group's legal counsel loomed, and tomorrow we'd have to face them head on. I felt a mix of adrenaline and doubt, the thrill of purpose intertwined with the dread of battle. Yet I knew one thing for certain, our fight wasn't just for a building. It was for the soul of our community and the sanctity of home for every person who'd been told they didn't belong. And as the final rays of daylight vanished, I realized the true test lay ahead. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and gray. The Brooklyn skyline etched in brittle lines against a faded sky that promised rain. I woke before my alarm, the judge's pin and brass key lying on my bedside table like talismans that had guided me through this week of turbulence. As I dressed in a simple navy suit, no flashy tie, just a white shirt that said, "I'm serious, but I'm one of you," I felt a familiar flutter of nerves. The same adrenaline that used to hit me before a big code deployment. Only this time, the deployment was personal, public, legal, and moral all at once. I took a breath, remembering the teens in our center's basement office, their hopeful faces lit by laptop glow, and the petition in Jasmine's hand. This fight was bigger than me, bigger than my family's drama. It was about whether a community could reclaim its own future. I headed downstairs, where Grandpa sat at the kitchen island, reading the morning paper like he was an ordinary retiree rather than a former federal judge about to cross-examine developers and attorneys over his grandson's nonprofit. He looked up as I poured 2 cups of coffee. His eyes were alert, proud, tired. "They're arguing technicalities," he said, nodding at a legal brief laid out before him. "They want to challenge your standing, claim the nonprofit is a veneer for commercial activity." I pulled out a chair and looked at him. "I know," I said quietly, "but we've got overwhelming community support. Bylaws airtight. And you and Dad as witnesses to intent." He smiled faintly. "Good. Remember, Alex, the law sometimes moves slow, but public will move faster. We have both." The subway ride to the courthouse felt unreal. The steel train rattled through tunnels as if carrying me toward a destiny I'd been scripting in my mind since Grandpa's questions 6 months ago. I adjusted my collar and checked my reflection in the window, not the brash startup bro, not the resentful son, but someone who had crossed the chasm between anger and purpose, exiting into the gusty street. I saw volunteers from the community center handing out flyers, "Support Carter Community Center hearing today. 10 a.m. Room 204. Their faces were resolute, and I felt my chest tighten with gratitude and responsibility. Every signature on those leaflets was a heartbeat in this living network of hope. Inside the courthouse, the wood-paneled hall felt solemn. Hushed whispers bouncing off marble floors. I spotted Dad in the gallery. Suit crisp, hands clasped. Mom stood beside him. Expression unreadable but eyes glistening. My heart roared as I approached, but I nodded at them. A silent promise I would honor the trust they were beginning to place in me. Grandpa, treading the threshold of his past and my future, joined me. He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "This is your moment," he whispered. The bailiff called our case, and we stepped into the courtroom like gladiators before the arena gates. The Landlord Association's counsel Slick, calculated, rose first, arguing that our basement office violated zoning restrictions, that a nonprofit couldn't provide services ordinarily offered by for-profit entities without competition, and that the Carter family's swift pivot smacked of opportunism. Their voice was crisp, their rhetoric seasoned, but I noticed the jury's furrowed brows and the judge's slow nods. When it was our turn, I stood and unclipped the pin, holding it in my palm as I spoke with a voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, we are not here to claim entitlement to profit. We're here to preserve dignity, to ensure that no child's potential is abandoned because their zip code dictated their access to education or legal aid. We've drafted bylaws that prohibit any revenue distribution. We've recruited volunteers without compensation. And we've secured funding from private donors, specifically earmarked for community programs." I saw the judge lean forward. Interest sharpened. Dad and Grandpa leaned in, and I felt the weight of their faith. Then came the twist that even this formal setting couldn't predict midway through my argument. The courtroom doors swung open, and Marcus Reed strode in, followed by Jasmine and two other teens, carrying printed testimonials from hundreds who'd benefited from our code clinics and legal workshops. "Your Honor," Marcus said, voice low but unwavering. "We have live feeds of volunteer hours logged, resumes built, and families whose landlord disputes were resolved pro bono by Carter volunteers. We also have demographic data showing the immediate uplift in this neighborhood's school attendance since our programs began." The judge's eyes flicked from the printed pages to me, then to the gallery, where the community packed the benches in supportive silence. The association's counsel sputtered, unprepared for this deluge of real-world evidence. I realized then that the power of narrative lived experience, documented proof, could eclipse even the finest legal briefs. When the verdict came, the judge ruled in our favor. The nonprofit's use of the property was protected under the charitable organization exemption, and the landlord association's claims were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't be refiled. A hush fell. Then murmurs of relief and jubilation spread through the courtroom like wildfire. I exhaled, my knees trembling. Grandpa reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, finely framed photograph from those black and white albums, the one where a young boy sat on his knee, wide-eyed, being told bedtime stories. He handed it to me. "Keep telling your story," he said softly. "This is only the beginning." Back outside, under a sky thinning to pale blue, we were met by a throng of supporters, cameras flashing, tears swelling. Mom wept openly, and Dad hugged me so hard I thought he might crack my ribs. But I didn't care. I saw community leaders talking strategy with Evelyn, local reporters scribbling notes, parents lifting their children onto their shoulders to point at me like I was a hero. And in my hand, I held the judge's photograph, and beneath it, the brass key with its home charm. Glinting in the morning light symbols intertwined justice and belonging, past and future. But even in that euphoric moment, I felt a cold spark of uncertainty. Outside the courthouse, among the throng, a suited man approached one of the Landlord Association's spokesmen, offering a curt handshake. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Profits lost will be recovered, one way or another." His words were a promise and a threat, reminding me that the ideologies at play, communal care versus private profit, would clash again. I realized that our victory was not a victory lap, but the first kilometer of a marathon. I would need to defend the community center's charter at every election, every budget cut, every bureaucratic upheaval. The landlord groups, the market forces, the social media skeptics, they'd regroup and press on. As the microphones shifted to record my statement, I looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors, family, the kids who'd stayed up all night studying code, and the broader public watching live streams. I felt the tremor of fear that comes with responsibility. The same fear I'd faced 6 months ago at Grandpa's Thanksgiving dinner, but now tempered by the clarity of purpose. "Today isn't the end of our story," I began, voice carrying across the plaza. "It's proof that when we fight for what's right, when we build bridges instead of walls, we can reclaim more than just property. We can reclaim hope and community. We'll keep our doors open to every neighbor who needs us, and we'll stand ready for whatever comes next." And in that charged moment, as the crowd erupted in applause, the bright glare of camera lights and the distant honk of a city bus blended into a single, triumphant chord. Yet beneath it all, I felt the key and pin pulsing in my palm, a reminder that home and justice are fragile, deserving of vigilance and compassion. As I stepped aside to let Mom and Dad address the reporters, I caught Grandpa's eye, and he nodded. The baton was passed, the race begun. And though the future was unwritten, I knew we'd met this chapter not as victims or villains, but as a community bound by the enduring promise of home. The next page awaited our courage to write it. I'm Ian Maxwell, 26, newly minted attorney. Last month I strode across the university stage in a midnight blue suit, summa cum laude, sash brushing my knees. Cameras flashed, friends whooped, professors beamed, And the 5 seats I'd reserved front row, gold-lettered name cards that read "Reserved for the Maxwells," sat as empty as a condemned house. I posed for photos anyway, handshake with the dean. Grin beside my study group. Thumb up with the constitutional law legend who once told me I had a litigator's spine. Inside, though, I felt nothing, just the cold knowledge that my parents had chosen my brother Nathan's flashy launch party over my once-in-a-lifetime graduation. That call had come a week earlier. "Sweetheart," Mom said, breezy as ever, "your dad and I might skip the ceremony. Nathan's app is having its big debut, sounds more relevant. You know translation, Ian. Good work. But your brother's hypothetical success outshines your actual achievements. Nathan is 2 years younger. A dropout turned visionary founder. He burns investor cash on neon slide decks and rooftop selfies. Meanwhile, I bartended weekends. Taught freshman seminars. Ate ramen over casebooks. And still landed a federal clerkship with Judge Harrow. When I texted that news home, Mom asked if clerk meant I'd be fetching coffee. Dad responded with a single ebby emoji. So their absence on graduation day didn't surprise me. But the silence afterward did. No call. No card. Not even a sorry we missed it. Watching classmates hug tear-damp mothers beneath the chandeliered ceiling. I felt an old weight settle between my ribs, resignation wearing the mask of contempt. I thanked everyone else who mattered, professors, scholarship committees. Even my landlord who'd forgiven 3 late rent fees, then buried myself in bar exam prep. Results dropped in mid-July. I passed on the first swing. Top percentile. But told no one at home. Why feed a family chat already choking on Nathan's dog and sunglasses selfies? Judge Harrow's mentor called a friend at the New York Herald. 2 days later, a feature appeared, first-generation grad tops bar. Joins prestigious firm. My photo half-smile. Suit a shade lighter than the backdrop circled in red ink. I read the piece once. Folded it. Went back to packing for my move downtown. A knock rattled my apartment door that Friday. There stood Dad in khakis. Newspaper under his arm like a white flag. We hadn't met face-to-face in months. He lifted the paper, eyes searching mine as though he expected me to autograph it. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, not angry. Just bewildered. As if he'd misplaced his keys and suspected I'd hidden them. I leaned against the frame. "You could read the headline," I said. He glanced down. "Against the odds, Ian Maxwell rises from ramen to rising star." His brow creased. "First gen, that's not. Because you never showed up." I cut in. "Not for graduation. Not for anything." He opened his mouth. Then closed it. Words evaporating like steam off asphalt. My phone buzzed on the counter, the firm confirming they'd cover 6 months' rent. I stepped inside to answer, leaving the door wide. "Delingo." Shoulders slumping. When I turned back, he tried again. "Your mother, she didn't mean the launch to." "Don't," I said. "You had the date for months. I worked 2 jobs. Skipped sleep. Lost friends because I thought if I hit every mark I'd finally matter to you. You couldn't spare a text." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You always seemed okay. Like you didn't need us." The words stung precisely because they were half true. I had acted unbreakable, never complained when they framed Nathan's podcast screenshot, yet shoved my scholarship letter into a drawer. Never protested when he got a $3. Zero drone, and I unwrapped socks. I'd played the self-sufficient son so well they believed the role. Even I almost did. "I needed you," I said quietly. "I just stopped expecting you." Silence stretched. Brittle as old parchment. Then he murmured about Nathan investors pulling out. Pressure mounting. The kid spending days in his room. "You always think of him first," I said. Voice harder than intended. I could be bleeding out and you'd ask if Nathan needed a Band-Aid. Dad flinched. "What can we do now? Your bar swearing in, may we come?" I pictured that empty row in the auditorium. Remembered the hollow ache. "I'll let you know," I said. "But don't count on front row seats." He nodded, folded the paper smaller, and walked down the stairwell. looking shrunken, almost breakable. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since childhood. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed again. Nathan. Saw the article. Nice of you to keep it quiet. Parents acting like you're a celebrity now. Could you intro me to someone for a bridge loan, even in freefall? He found a way to turn my moment into his safety net. I set the phone face down and stared out the window at a food truck line snaking along the curb. Strangers basking in ordinary summer light. Somewhere between that silence and the hum of tires on asphalt, a realization settled my worth, no longer hinged on a seat my parents never claimed. I moved downtown the first Sunday of August. The city heat wavering above the river like something alive. And I told myself the skyline was a fresh ledger. Every window, a blank cell waiting for new entries. Yet as the boxes thumped onto the parquet, a text from Nathan pinged. Mom says you still won't call. So I'm the envoy. Bro. Call her, and I felt the ledger stain before any numbers had been written. A faint smear, no eye could miss once it was there, daring me to rub it out and risk tearing the page. Orientation at Whitaker and Sloan lasted all of 30 minutes before Judge Harrow's clerk ushered me into chambers with a grin that said showtime. Rookie. Harrow handed me a slim file marked Rossi v. Grayspire Holdings and asked if I felt like wrestling Goliath before breakfast. The tenants in Rossi were nurses, retirees, first-gen kids like me, facing eviction so Grayspire could flip the building into boutique condos. A story older than the city's cobblestones. I swallowed, nodded, and heard myself promise to draft an injunction by Friday, even though clerks weren't supposed to moonlight as crusaders. Especially not against a corporate whale rumored to bankroll half the tech startups south of Market Street. Halfway through the file, a name leapt out: Avalanche Capital. Lead investor in Grayspire and, according to Nathan's LinkedIn brag sheets, the same firm that had floated his second funding round. Suddenly the case wasn't just David and Goliath. It was family dinner with a grenade under the roast. And I could either defuse it or pretend the pin was still in. That night, among half-unpacked boxes, I reread Mom's handwritten apology sunflower doodle in the margin. Ink slightly smudged, where a tear must have fallen, and understood she'd mailed her contrition before learning their mortgage was now collateral for Nathan's failing dream. A fact he texted me at 1 a.m., as if he were confessing nothing worse than borrowing my jacket. Needed quick leverage. Bro. House will be fine once Series C lands. Just keep Avalanche happy. Yeah. Sleep evaporated. I kept picturing the old clapboard place on Sycamore Lane, Dad's weekend drywall patches. Mom's petunias. My initials carved on the porch rail going up at auction because my brother had sold a future he couldn't guarantee. By dawn, I had every Grayspire file spread across the floor. Highlighter neon against the clauses. Avalanche had slipped into 99-year leases. Clauses that let them raise rent 300% whenever renovation was declared. It was legal engineering as elegant and deadly as a scalpel. And if I brought it to Judge Harrow, I might end Avalanche's tenancy in my brother's life, and possibly mine at the firm. I hit print anyway. The copier spitting pages like an anxious metronome. Each sheet a drumbeat saying, choose. Wednesday, Judge Harrow called me in. Eyes flicking from the bulging folder to my face. You realize who sits on Avalanche's board, he asked. I did state senators. Former judges. Rainmakers who wrote the unwritten rules of our profession. He let the silence stretch. Then said, almost kindly, every lawyer meets a crossroads. Polish the ladder or kick it out from under men who shouldn't be climbing. Make sure the fall you're planning isn't your own. I walked back to my cubicle with the folder tucked under one arm like contraband. Pulse hammering. Mind already listing the consequences in descending order of ruin. But beneath the fear thrummed something steadier: outrage that the scales of justice were still rigged with counterfeit weights, and the knowledge that I had spent a lifetime proving I could bear more than was fair without breaking. Thursday evening, Nathan showed up unannounced. Rain-slick hoodie. Eyes red around the rims, as if he'd been awake as long as I had. He tried his old grin, found it wouldn't stick, and muttered, I'm in deep. Ian. Avalanche calls the note next month if metrics don't spike. Mom and Dad don't know. He paused. scanning the stacks of gray spire depositions on my table. Realization dawning like rot spreading under paint. "You're going after them," he whispered. I waited. Heart loud. "If you burn them, you burn me." His voice cracked, not accusation, not plea, just raw terror. I'd imagined this confrontation 100 ways, me righteous, him defensiva, some cinematic slam of doors. Instead, the room filled with two boys who once built Lego towns and believed the same plastic walls could protect them forever. I set the Rossi file between us, my hand on the cover. "Maybe," I said, "we find a way both towns stay standing, or we rebuild from rubble." But honestly, this time, he stared. Silent. And in that silence, the copier's green light flashed. Ready for the next page. Waiting to decide whether it would illuminate a weapon or a blueprint for something better. And that decision, mine, his, ours, hung in the air. Trembling. Unfinished. That night, after Nathan's trembled admission, I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise. Legal pads spreading like lily pads across the wood while the city outside yawned awake. Somewhere between cup 3 and 4 of stale coffee, I stopped listing consequences and began mapping possibilities if Avalanche's eviction plan relied on tenant tracking data scraped without consent that could shred their case. But the only platform with that granular geofence info was, of course, my brother's sputtering app. At 7 a.m., I locked the Rossi file in my briefcase, threw on the Navy suit that had already survived 2 ceremonies and 1 shattered childhood, and walked to chambers rehearsing a pitch, expose Avalanche's privacy breach, win a temporary injunction, buy tenants a lifeline, and dare the boardroom giants to swat at the clerk who'd yanked off their mask. I had no proof yet, only a theory and a knot in my gut. But sometimes the first brick of a bridge is belief strong enough to hold your own weight. And as I pushed Harrow's door, I felt that brick take shape beneath me. Even while the river of risk roared below, Judge Harrow listened without blinking, while I laid out the skeleton overlapping GPS pings. Targeted rent increase notices arriving the same week. Nathan's app launched a neighborhood analytics feature, in internal emails hinting at data synergy between Avalanche subsidiaries. When I finally exhaled, he tapped a pen against the Rossi cover and said, "Obtain the flesh by Monday affidavits. Metadata trails. Something a first-year associate can't shrug off, or we let the tide roll." "Understand," I nodded. Throat dessert dry. Because obtaining that flesh meant turning my own brother's servers inside out. And even if I found the smoking code snippet, I'd torch whatever chance he had left to refinance the family mortgage he'd already pawned. Harrow slid the file back to me. "If your compass point true," he murmured, "trust that the map will redraw around you." I left chambers buoyed by resolve and sick with dread. A sailor who'd nailed his colors to the mast only to glimpse the storm cresting higher than the sails. Nathan met me that afternoon in a windowless co-working closet that reeked of burnt espresso and venture desperation. His hoodie looked slept in. His eyes worse. But when I asked for server logs, he didn't argue, just stared at the ceiling like it might show him a softer universe. "If Avalanche sees I cooperated," he said, "they'll crush me before the market can." I told him silence would do the crushing for them and pushed a USB across the desk. While code scrolled on his screen, a childhood refrain looped in my head: 2 brothers. 1 flashlight. Hunting monsters under the bed, and I realized we had grown up only to find the monsters had bank accounts and lobbying arms. 3 hours later, we hit pay dirt, a batch script that funneled zip-level tenant movement from Nathan's app straight into Grayspire's rent algorithms. Stamped with a timestamp, 4 weeks before eviction notices dropped. Nathan's shoulders sagged as though the script weighed physical tons. He whispered, "They told me it was anonymized." Outside, traffic blared. Indifferent. As if daring us to claim that excuse in open court, Monday's emergency hearing was standing room only. Reporters jockeying for angles, while Avalanche's counsel, polished marble in human form, smirked at the clerk who'd apparently overdosed on righteous caffeine. I presented the logs, the cross-referenced timestamps, the memo where a Grayspire VP crowed. Data pipeline, live time to milk the nurse nest. Murmurs rippled like wind over wheat. Avalanche's team objected. Motioned. Blustered at. But Harrow's gavel cracked the room to silence, before granting a 90-day injunction and hinting loudly about federal privacy violations. My phone buzzed non-stop afterward, partners at Whitaker and Sloan fuming over lost retainers. A new reporter begging for comment. Mom's number appearing, then vanishing, as if she couldn't decide whether apology or accusation should come first. I walked down the courthouse steps into noon sunlight that felt both scalding and clean. Aware I might have nuked my budding career, my brother's balance sheet, and my parents' equity in one swing of principle, yet inside. A strange calm bloomed, a lighthouse beam cutting the smoke. Because for once the ledger of my life showed the right numbers in the right columns, even if the bottom line was still dripping in red. That evening, Dad called to say the bank had frozen their line of credit. Foreclosure letters whispering at the edge of the mailbox. His voice was a weathered fence about to give. Nathan, he said, had confessed everything: servers, scripts, the mortgage collateral, then gone quiet. Packing boxes in the room where our Lego towns once sprawled. I pictured the Sycamore house breathing like an aging boxer on the ropes, petunia beds holding their color against October chill, and heard myself promise nothing except honesty. I would testify if subpoenaed. I couldn't conjure lost capital, but I would not let them face the bank alone. 2 hours later, I drafted a settlement proposal. Avalanche drops the evictions. Funds affordable units. Covers my parents' mortgage in exchange for reduced penalties and a public statement salvaging their commitment to ethical innovation. It was a gamble bordering on lunacy. But sometimes the only negotiation chip you own is the fire you're willing to set. And avalanches, by nature, only stop when the slope beneath them shifts. I hit send, pulse matching the cursor's blink, and waited for the mountain to answer. The reply landed at 3 a.m. Avalanche would talk, but only if Nathan signed a cooperation agreement and I resigned from Whitaker and Sloan to avoid conflict optics. Dawn found me on the balcony watching sunflowers in a neighbor's planter crane toward first light. Petals ragged yet stubborn. And I understood the symbol my parents had tried to hand me outside the bar ceremony: grow toward warmth. Even when roots remember frost. I dialed Whitaker's senior partner. Braced for the guillotine. Instead, she offered a quieter path: pro bono unit. Full backing. Headline risk be damned. Law, she said, still honors the brave. Occasionally. By noon, Avalanche caved on the injunction. A trust fund inked to rehab the building. And Nathan, pale but upright, signed papers that traded his CEO badge for whistleblower immunity and a consultancy that might one day rebuild what he'd torched. When the press conference ended, he stood beside me. No podium. No drones. Just two brothers blinking under flashbulbs. You think Mom's petunias will survive a November move? He asked. I shrugged. They've lived through worse. Camera shutters clicked. A flock taking flight. And in that frozen surge of light, I felt the story pause on a comma. Not a period. The next sentence unwritten, but finally ours to draft if we were willing to hold the pen.